People always wanted to know, and still do actually, want to know about him. And I do understand it a lot better now than I did, let's say, when I was younger.
Priscilla Presley has revealed a new detail about Elvis's final night that changes everything. She wasn't there when he died, but days before, he made a long, emotional phone call she never expected. His voice sounded different. His words felt unfinished. What did Elvis really mean that night? And why does Priscilla believe it was a goodbye she missed completely? Let's find out. The call that broke the silence. The phone rang late that night, and Priscilla Presley almost didn't answer it. She had been keeping her distance, protecting herself, maintaining the careful boundaries that came with being Elvis Presley's ex-wife. Their conversations had become short and practical over the months since their divorce, mostly about their daughter Lisa Marie, or quick check-ins that never went deeper than surface politeness. Elvis had not called like this in a long time. This wasn't about schedules or logistics or their daughter. Something in his voice that night was different from the very first moment she picked up the phone. Priscilla wanted the facts understood from the beginning. She was Elvis Presley's ex-wife. They had been divorced. She was living her own separate life. She emphasized repeatedly that she was not present the night Elvis died. She was not at Graceland when it happened. She learned about his death the same way much of the world did, through a phone call that shattered everything. This story was not about that final night. This was about something quieter, something that happened before, something that had haunted her for decades. This was about the last real conversation they had, the last time Elvis stayed on the line long enough to let his guard down, the last time she heard him talk like the person he used to be before the world claimed him. Priscilla didn't know it would be the last long call. Elvis didn't say goodbye. Neither of them treated that conversation like it mattered more than any other late-night phone call between two people who once loved each other deeply. Years later, after the grief settled into something she could carry, Priscilla would reflect on that night with heartbreaking clarity. If she had known that call mattered so much, she would have listened differently. She would have asked the questions that hung in the air between them. She would have pushed past the politeness and the boundaries to reach the person she knew was struggling beneath the surface. But she didn't know. None of us ever know when the last conversation will be the last one. The relationship between Priscilla and Elvis at that time existed within carefully drawn lines. They were divorced, living separate lives, each trying to find their footing in a world that constantly reminded them of what they used to be together. Contact between them had become polite, short, restrained. They spoke when they needed to speak, and then they hung up. But this call was different. Elvis stayed on the line. He didn't rush through the conversation. He didn't make excuses to hang up. He kept talking, and Priscilla found herself settling into the couch, phone pressed to her ear, listening to a version of Elvis she hadn't heard in a long time. Something felt different immediately. There was no urgency in his voice, no agenda driving the conversation forward. He seemed content just to talk, to fill the silence with words that didn't necessarily need to be said. Priscilla recognized the shift, but couldn't name it. She felt the change in his energy, heard the vulnerability threading through his words, but she didn't yet understand what it meant. People reach out when they feel the ground shifting beneath them, when the walls they've built start to feel too close, when loneliness becomes louder than pride. What happens next will reveal what Elvis chose to share that night, and what he couldn't bring himself to say, what he said to her. Priscilla remembered his tone with painful clarity. Elvis sounded calmer than usual that night, his words coming slower, each sentence delivered without the guardedness that had defined their recent conversations. He wasn't performing. He wasn't pretending everything was fine. He wasn't putting on the mask he wore for everyone else. He sounded tired, but not in the frantic, desperate way she had heard before during difficult times in their marriage. This was a different kind of exhaustion, deeper, quieter, like someone who had been carrying something heavy for too long and finally set it down, even if just for a moment. Elvis did not talk about fame that night. He didn't mention his career, his upcoming shows, or the pressures that had consumed his life for so long. The machinery of stardom, which had dominated nearly every aspect of his existence for 2 decades, was notably absent from the conversation. Instead, he focused on the past, on moments that felt small at the time, but had somehow grown larger in his memory. He talked about the early years, before everything got so complicated. He remembered the simplicity of those days with a kind of aching nostalgia, as if he was trying to find his way back to a version of himself that no longer existed. There was longing in his voice when he spoke about that time, a clear wish that things could have stayed simpler, smaller, more manageable. He brought up moments Priscilla had almost forgotten, small, ordinary things that hadn't seemed significant when they happened. He talked about drives they used to take, conversations they had had in quiet rooms, the way life felt before the expectations became overwhelming. He remembered details she was surprised he had held on to, small observations about her that proved he had been paying attention even when she thought he was too consumed by his career to notice. There was regret in his voice, though he never named it directly. He spoke about how fast everything had moved, how he sometimes felt like he'd been carried along by forces he couldn't control. He wondered aloud what might have been different if he'd made other choices, if he'd held on to certain things instead of letting them slip away. The questions he posed had no answers, and he didn't seem to expect any. He was simply thinking out loud, examining the architecture of his life with fresh eyes. Priscilla listened as Elvis revisited these memories, hearing both affection and sorrow in the way he described them. He wasn't asking her to fix anything. He wasn't seeking forgiveness or absolution. He wasn't trying to reconcile or suggest they should get back together. He was simply remembering, turning these moments over in his mind like stones worn smooth by water, finding comfort in the act of recollection itself. He didn't confess secrets. He didn't ask for help. He didn't name the pain that seemed to hover just beneath the surface of his words. But it was there, present in every story he told, in every memory he pulled from the depths of their shared history. The heartbreak lay in what he circled around but never directly said. Elvis was reaching back toward a time when life felt manageable, when love felt uncomplicated, when he still believed he could control the shape of his own story. He was searching for something in those memories, some understanding or peace that seemed to elude him in his present life. He talked for a long time that night, longer than he had in months, and Priscilla listened, sensing the importance of the moment, even if she couldn't yet understand why it mattered so much. She heard the weight in his words, felt the significance of what he was sharing, but she couldn't see the full picture yet. She couldn't know that he was saying goodbye in the only way he knew how. But there were things Elvis didn't say, and those silences would haunt Priscilla for years. What he didn't say. The weight of that conversation lived as much in what Elvis didn't say as in what he did. He never apologized for the pain their marriage had caused, for the ways he had failed her or himself. He never said goodbye in any way that felt final. He never gave voice to the fear that Priscilla would later realize had been present all along, lurking beneath every story and every pause. Elvis opened doors emotionally that night, stood in the doorways looking in, but never quite walked through them. He came close to certain truths, circled around certain feelings, but always pulled back before crossing into territory that might have required him to face something he wasn't ready to face. It was as if he was testing the waters, seeing how close he could get to the edge without falling over. Priscilla would spend years thinking about those moments, the pauses that lasted just a beat too long, the sentences that trailed off into silence, the subjects he approached and then abandoned. In hindsight, she recognized them as invitations he couldn't quite extend, confessions he couldn't quite make. They were doors left ajar, but not opened, opportunities for deeper connection that neither of them fully seized. People near the end often talk around their pain instead of naming it directly. They offer pieces of the truth without assembling them into something whole. They avoid final words because saying them out loud makes them real, transforms fear into prophecy, turns possibility into certainty. There's a superstition in speaking difficult truths, a belief that voicing them gives them power. Elvis did this throughout the conversation. He gestured toward loneliness without calling it that. He spoke about exhaustion without admitting how deep it went, how completely it had infiltrated every aspect of his life. He referenced struggle without asking for help, maintaining the illusion of control, even as that control slipped further from his grasp. Priscilla heard all of it, understood some of it, but didn't press. She had learned over the years that pushing Elvis toward vulnerability often made him retreat. She gave him space, waited for him to say what he needed to say in his own time, believing that patience and acceptance would eventually create room for honesty. But that time never came. The things Elvis couldn't say the night remained unspoken, trapped in the silence between his words, present in every pause and every subject. He changed just when it started to matter. The conversation was full of almost moments, of nearly said things that hung in the air and then dissolved before they could take solid form. This chapter of their story was quiet, reflective, and unbearably heavy. It was filled with the ghost of a conversation that wanted to happen, but never quite did, with truths that pressed against the surface but never broke through. And in that silence, in that absence of final words, lay some of the deepest pain Priscilla would carry in the years to come. On the other end of the line, Priscilla carried her own complicated feelings. Priscilla's side of the line. Priscilla's emotional state during that call was complicated, layered with years of history and hurt and love that had never fully gone away. She cared about Elvis deeply. That had never stopped, even after the divorce, even after the pain. But she was also guarded, protecting herself from the emotional undertow that came with loving someone whose life had become so chaotic and consuming. She listened with both openness and caution. She wanted to be there for him, wanted to offer comfort if he needed it. But she also knew the dangers of getting pulled back into the orbit of his troubles. She had fought hard to establish her own identity, to build a life that didn't revolve entirely around being Elvis Presley's wife or ex-wife. That independence had been hard-won, and she wasn't willing to surrender it easily. So she didn't push when she sensed him holding back. She didn't ask the hard questions that might have forced him to confront whatever he was dancing around. She respected the boundaries they had established, even when part of her wondered if those boundaries were helping or hurting, if the distance they had created was protection or punishment. Priscilla felt something was off that night. Some instinct told her this conversation mattered more than the surface level indicated. There was an intensity to Elvis's need to talk, a weight to the memories he was sharing that suggested deeper currents running beneath their words. But she convinced herself everything was fine, that Elvis was just feeling nostalgic, that this was simply a moment of reflection rather than something more urgent. Her internal conflict played out in small ways throughout the call. She almost asked if he was okay, really okay, but stopped herself. She considered pressing him on certain subjects, but decided against it. She chose restraint when perhaps urgency was needed, holding back when maybe she should have pushed forward. Sometimes love teaches restraint when urgency is needed. Priscilla had learned to give Elvis space, to not overwhelm him with concern or questions that might make him feel smothered. She had learned that he responded better to gentle presence than to direct confrontation, that pushing him too hard often resulted in him shutting down completely. But that night, restraint meant missing signals that might have been important. It meant hearing worry in his voice, but not naming it. It meant sensing goodbye without recognizing it as such. It meant letting him circle around his pain without demanding that he face it directly. Priscilla would carry this conflict for years, the knowledge that she had listened, truly listened, but perhaps not in the way that mattered most. She had been present but not persistent, caring but not confrontational. She had given him the space he seemed to want while missing the signs that maybe what he needed was someone to close that space, to refuse to let him hide. The guilt of that realization would surface again and again in the years to come. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because she couldn't help wondering if doing something differently might have changed what happened next. Eventually, the conversation had to end. There was no dramatic goodbye. Elvis didn't say, "I love you," in a way that felt weighted with finality. He didn't offer any indication that this would be the last time they spoke like this, the last long conversation they would ever have. There were no prophetic final words, no sudden declarations, no moment that screamed of ending. The call ended the way most calls end, with ordinary words that carry no particular significance until hindsight transforms them into something precious and painful. Elvis said something like, "We'll talk again soon." The words were casual, an assumption of continuity, a belief that time stretched out endlessly before them. Priscilla responded with some version of "take care of yourself," the kind of gentle reminder she had given him hundreds of times before. There might have been a mention of Lisa Marie, a promise to coordinate schedules for an upcoming visit, the kind of practical details that always marked the end of their conversations. Then the line went quiet. Elvis hung up first. Priscilla held the phone for a moment longer, listening to the silence, and then set it back in its cradle. She went about the rest of her evening, carrying the conversation with her, but not dwelling on it in any particular way. It had been good to hear from him, good to hear him open up a little, but she didn't mark the moment as anything extraordinary. The ordinariness of that ending would become its own kind of tragedy. If Priscilla had known, if either of them had known, perhaps the last words would have been different. Perhaps there would have been more said, more acknowledged, more room given to the feelings that lived just beneath the surface. But they didn't know. So the conversation ended the way thousands of conversations end every day, with the assumption that there would be another one, that time was still on their side, that the important things could wait until later, because later would always come. The next time Priscilla heard about Elvis, everything had changed. The morning is still on She got the news. Priscilla learned that Elvis had died through a phone call, though not the one she had been expecting. The news came suddenly, violently, shattering the ordinary rhythm of her day with information her mind initially refused to accept. She was not present at Graceland when it happened. She had not been there in his final hours, had not witnessed whatever struggle or surrender had taken place in those last moments. Ginger Alden, Elvis's girlfriend at the time, had discovered him unresponsive in the bathroom. By the time Priscilla received the call, Elvis was already gone, already part of the past, already transformed from a living, breathing person into a memory. The facts needed to be clear because rumors and speculation would swirl for years, decades even. Priscilla was not a witness to Elvis's death. She was not part of that final chapter in the way many people assumed or suggested. She was simply someone who had loved him, divorced him, and was trying to build a life separate from the consuming nature of his fame. But when the news came, none of that separation mattered. Shock flooded through her, immediate and overwhelming, followed by disbelief so complete that she couldn't process what she was being told. It couldn't be true. It didn't make sense. She had just talked to him. His voice had been in her ear just days before, tired but present, reflective but alive. Priscilla's mind immediately began replaying the phone call. Every word Elvis had said took on new weight. Every pause became significant. Every memory he had shared felt like a clue she should have decoded. The conversation that had seemed like simple nostalgia now revealed itself as something else entirely, a goodbye, an accounting, a final attempt at connection before the end. The call became louder in her memory than the headlines. While the world mourned Elvis Presley the icon, the legend, the king of rock and roll, Priscilla mourned the man she had known intimately. She mourned the voice on the other end of the line, the person who had reached out to her in what she now understood had been his final days. She replayed the conversation over and over, searching for clues she had missed, warnings she hadn't recognized, desperate attempts at connection she had failed to fully receive. Had he been trying to tell her something? Had he known somehow that time was running out? Had he been asking for help in a language she had failed to understand? The questions came in waves, relentless and unanswerable. The morning she got the news became a dividing line in her life, before and after, the world with Elvis in it and the world without him. Everything that came before that phone call existed in one reality, and everything that came after existed in another, and there was no way to bridge the gap between them. The phone call would echo in Priscilla's mind for decades. Memory has a way of reshaping conversations over time, especially those that carry the weight of finality. Priscilla found herself returning to that last phone call again and again, hearing it differently each time, discovering new layers of meaning in words that had seemed straightforward when Elvis first spoke them. Lines that seemed small at the time grew enormous in hindsight. A passing comment about being tired became evidence of deeper exhaustion, a window into suffering she hadn't fully recognized. A moment of nostalgia became a cry for help, disguised as reminiscence. A pause became a missed opportunity, a chance to ask the question that might have changed everything. The burden of hindsight was heavy, almost crushing at times. Priscilla couldn't help but wonder, was he asking for something she missed? Was there a moment when she could have said the right thing? Ask the right question, offer the right comfort. Could that conversation have changed anything? Or was the outcome already written, the ending already inevitable? These questions had no answers, which made them impossible to set down. They followed her through the years, surfacing at unexpected moments. When she heard his music playing somewhere, when she talked about him in interviews, when she lay awake at night thinking about all the versions of their story that might have been. Grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers repeatedly. The same quiet questions asked over and over until they become part of the background noise of life. Priscilla carried those whispers with her, that last conversation playing on loop in her mind, each replay revealing something she hadn't noticed before, or confirming something she wished she had understood then. The call became a kind of sacred text she studied for meaning, searching for the truth of what Elvis had been trying to tell her, what he had needed from her, what neither of them had been able to say out loud. She parsed every word, analyzed every pause, reconstructed the emotional landscape of that night, with the desperate hope that understanding it might somehow ease the pain of losing him. But understanding didn't bring peace. It brought clarity, which was sometimes harder to bear than confusion. Priscilla came to understand that Elvis had been saying goodbye that night, whether he knew it consciously or not. He had been taking inventory, making peace with the past, reaching back toward the person he used to be before fame consumed him. And she had listened, had been present, had given him that space. But she hadn't known to hold on tighter, to refuse to let the conversation end, to demand that he tell her what was really going on beneath the surface of those carefully chosen words. After years of silence, Priscilla decided it was time to speak. Why she's talking about it now? Age and distance brought Priscilla a kind of clarity that wasn't available to her in the immediate aftermath of Elvis's death. Time softened the sharp edges of grief enough that she could look at that last conversation without being consumed by it, without drowning in the what-ifs and the might-have-beens. She began speaking about the call publicly, not because she wanted to rewrite history or shift blame or claim some special knowledge about Elvis's final days. She spoke because silence had preserved pain rather than at peace. Keeping that conversation private, locked away in her own memory, hadn't protected it or honored it. It had simply isolated her with it. Priscilla wanted to honor the man behind the myth, the person who had called her late that night, searching for connection, reaching across the distance between them to touch something real and familiar. She wanted people to understand that even someone as famous and seemingly larger than life as Elvis Presley could feel small and scared and alone. Her decision to share this story came from a place of love and loss, from the understanding that some truths deserve to be told even when they're painful, even when they reveal vulnerability and fear. The last phone call mattered because it revealed Elvis's humanity at a moment when he had very little left to hide behind, when the persona had fallen away, and what remained was simply a man trying to make sense of his life. Priscilla spoke now because enough time had passed that she could hold the memory without being destroyed by it. She spoke because she believed that their story, the real story, not the public narrative, contained something worth preserving, something that went beyond celebrity gossip and touched on the universal experience of loss, regret, and the things we wish we had said to people before they were gone. She wasn't looking for sympathy or attention. She wasn't trying to insert herself into Elvis's final chapter in a way that wasn't authentic. She was simply bearing witness to a moment that had shaped the rest of her life, offering it up not as entertainment, but as testament to the complexity of love and loss. By sharing the story of that last phone call, Priscilla was also releasing it, letting it exist outside the private prison of her own memory. She was allowing others to understand that goodbye doesn't always announce itself, that the last conversation can look and sound like any other conversation, that we often don't know we're losing someone until they're already gone.